And welcome back. Thanks for staying with the newsfeed late night. With unemployment reaching a record high of 32.5% and youth unemployment sitting at well over 50%, did today's budget address issues concerning the youth? Well, the chairperson of the WITS Rethinking Economics for Africa, Mosala, and the Secretary General of the WITS Black Management Forum, Bonga Makhanya, joins us now to talk to these issues. Good evening to you both, and thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thanks again for having us.
Now, I'll begin with you. Listening to the finance minister and the fiscal strategy that our government is taking, what's your feeling? First and foremost, when you hear that the public finances remain under strain, in fact, to put it simply, the minister says we owe a lot of people a lot of money. What does that say to you as a young person in this country, in an institution of higher learning, hoping that when you get out there, there will be some economy for you to participate in?
Well, I think, first of all, going into the budget, like you said, our primary concern as young people are issues relating to unemployment, as well as obviously basic development, education, whether young people in this country have enough to eat. And I think what was quite disappointing, despite the fact that we do owe a lot of people a lot of money, what was quite disappointing coming out of the fiscal consolidation budget was a strategy regarding how unemployment is going to be addressed and how the structural unemployment, particularly coming out of the pandemic, will be addressed by government. Because as much as the Minister of Finance does not like, the A word, the austerity term, it is quite alarming when you do have to decrease government spending during a crisis like this, and then you expect that there's going to be economic growth coming out of that. And that's the type of economic growth that we expect will provide jobs for us in the economy going forward. I think in a time of crisis like this, you do want government to take the lead. You want government to take a stand and show an authoritative stance on what they're going to be doing for young people. And I think in terms of what the president said in the State of the Nation address around economic restructuring and economic stimulus, you didn't really see any of that coming out of this budget, and that was quite disappointing.
Bonga, did he address the question of growth, or did he even answer the question of growth? There are growth-inducing initiatives that we could speak to, and I know there's a great concern of the debt, and he's saying we've got to be careful with the debt. So in order for us not to raise the debt, we cut expenditure. But many have been arguing in economics that no, you really do need to spend in the economy so that you can induce the kind of growth that will bring about the jobs that we want to see. Did it come out for you?
Look, and I agree that we need sustainable debt levels in our country. But I'm going to have to agree with Noah that in terms of growth, obviously there's projected figures like 3.3% for GDP for 2021. But as to how it's going to translate to the real economy on the ground, and in particular to the youth, it didn't particularly address that, because we know that the institutions that are in place don't work for the youth. For example, if you're starting or trying to start a small business as a young person in South Africa, it's one of the hardest things to do. The NYDA currently probably doesn't even have a board right now, which is some of the institutions that are in place to fund youth initiatives, right? And you look at the funding that they get, and it's like only 500 million rand to fund all youth initiatives in the country. So in terms of growth and how it translates to youth specifically, I don't think he touched on it enough. And I agree that in terms of our debt, in as much as some might say we're headed towards a sovereign debt crisis, right now we're in a crisis. And if it means that government has to take on more debt to finance infrastructure development, economic growth, and all these social challenges that we need to tackle, then that's what they need to do. But austerity measures it's not the time for austerity measures right now. We need a solid plan, and you need to tell us exactly how it's going to translate on the real economy, how it's going to actually put money in the hands of young people and other people on the ground, because he didn't really touch on that. Which jobs will we see? What type of jobs will we see going into 2021? And what type of industries are we going to build? What type of new companies are going to be funded? And I don't think he spoke on that level of growth. It was a more of a political rhetoric that we always hear year in, year out, but nothing that really translates into the real economy.
What is your thinking, I mean, as an economist yourself, around the readjusting of the tax brackets and rebates brackets up by 5%? I mean, the hope is that there'll be, I suppose, more money in the pockets of households, which will eventually be plowed in. And is it enough as a tool to use?
Look, I think definitely that's definitely going to bring some relief to individuals, especially low income earners. I mean, if you just go to Economics 101 in terms of sort of disposable income, the less taxes you have to pay, obviously you have more money to then consume on other things, which is going to translate into real sort of economic participation. So if you think about it like this, if I don't have to spend money on taxes anymore because I'm on a lower tax bracket, I have now money to go and support the local, the local retail shop, where I can contribute to the local economy, I can contribute to the retail economy. And that's how we're going to see where individual relief is going to translate into much broader macroeconomic relief, where we're going to see a lot of stimulus into these other small companies and even big companies, where people have more money in their hands because that money is not going towards paying the income tax anymore. So yes, definitely, I think not only on an individual level, but also for businesses and for the macroeconomy as a whole, it's going to really assist in growing even local and bigger economies in broader society.
Yeah. Now, there are political parties as well as unions now who are decrying our tax strategy. For example, the fact that in 2022, corporates are going to be taxed less by 1%, albeit, but also the fact that we are letting out billions and billions of rands in illicit financial flows, and we are not beginning to tax the wealthy enough. What's your view?
I mean, on the issue of tax, I think it's important to point out that it's not just that 1% reduction in corporate tax that we're concerned about. We're concerned about the steady decline of corporate tax over 2 decades, and what that has resulted in, because we see that these decreasing corporate taxes have had a very positive relationship with increasing inequality. So the logic in macroeconomics is, if you don't tax these large corporates as much, they, like Bonga has given the example of an individual having more money to spend because they're not being taxed. The idea that businesses are going to invest and they're going to employ more people with this additional money that they have. But what we see in our economy, because of the low local investment that we have, these tax reliefs that are given to corporate entities and they're given to wealthy individuals tend to go towards profits, and they go into the pockets of wealthier individuals, and it deepens inequalities, because while you take away from the tax base to say, okay, we're going to allow corporates to be the ones that inject cash into our economy, this cash stays in very, I think, consolidated hands. It stays in like the hands of the wealthy, and there isn't the flow of money in our economy. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration. Another thing that needs to be taken into consideration is, as much as we praise the tax adjustments that have been made in terms of personal taxes for people in lower and middle income groups, as much as that is praiseworthy, it's not good enough to just decrease the tax burden on people in middle income and lower income groups. The tax burden does have to be shifted, and that's something that our government has not taken a really strong stance on. The tax burden needs to be shifted into the top 1% of our population, because it's often said that South Africa burdens it's sort of like middle class base of citizens, the working middle class, with its taxes. But what isn't often stated is that at the top, at the very, very top, taxes aren't really being paid. And I quite like the fact that our SARS commissioner did point out that a lot of the tax data that they're going to be looking for, which Minister Mboweni mentioned, in terms of wealthier people, is tax that's in assets, because these people are necessarily people that have a lot of consistent income to tax. They're people that need to be taxed based on their wealth, based on their assets, based on inheritance taxes. And you find that in countries like Argentina, they've actually taken very innovative steps to institute wealth taxes, even if it's a once-off wealth tax, in order to subsidize something like our vaccine drive. Those types of things do make a difference. And I think that our government hasn't really been innovative in how they tax in this country. And that's sort of led to the perpetual either either reducing our spending or saying, no, you know what, instead of just reducing the spending, we'll lessen the taxes. It creates a trade-off that really shouldn't be there, because there's a lot of wealth in this country that isn't being taxed. And if we're going to create a very fair tax scheme that takes us proportionally to people's wealth, we do need to look at our upper 1%, our upper 5% of wealth in this country, because you'll find that those people, I think the top 10% of people in the country own about 60% of the wealth is the current data. And we need to look at that wealth, and that's the wealth that needs to be taxed. We can't burden the people who are the majority with the tax simply because they are the majority, but they don't own the majority of wealth.
Right. And Bonga, are you concerned about the word reprioritization when the minister talks about it? And there is some concern that, for example, money that was supposed to go build a university will probably now be reprioritized to something else, particularly to respond to the recovery post-COVID-19. SAFTU, for example, saying, well, you'll find that when we get to the point where post-COVID-19, and we'll be with the Fees Must Fall movement once again saying, well, there's no money to fund free higher education. What's your feeling, Bonga, on the word reprioritization? Do you think it's a good thing?
Look, I think the word reprioritization is problematic when that reprioritization doesn't center the youth, and it doesn't center sort of like uplifting and issues that relate directly to growing this country. So what I mean by that is that, for example, government has spent about 100 billion rand in something that they call the youth employment, non-employment, the employment program, the presidential employment program. But in that employment program, only 11 billion is going towards dealing with the youth unemployment crisis of that entire 100 billion. So something like that, for example, is quite discerning, because even that, the fact that now there's only 10% of that money is going towards solving the youth unemployment, it means that the youth is not a priority to this government. The fact that this reprioritization doesn't center around free education, or doesn't center around capacitating the basic education system, it means that reprioritization does not center youth and does not center the future of this country. So in that, saying that, it's highly problematic, because in as much as we agree that there's a lot of social issues in all corners of society, be it in health, be it in infrastructure, be it in education, but the cornerstone and fundamentally, we need to prioritize the youth. We need to prioritize capacitating the youth. The youth in this country have resorted to substance abuse. They've resorted to criminality because of hopelessness and because of the fact that there's no opportunities. You look at the basic education system, for example, I don't want to drag on too much, but start off with 1.2 million people in grade 1, but only 400,000 people pass the matric, which means that the system itself is fundamentally flawed if that's your output. And we're saying, where do those people go? They resort to substance, they resort to criminality, which brings us back to where we are today, where we have so many people unemployed because they don't have the skills, they don't have the capacity. And government doesn't have a plan to prioritize that youth that has been left out the system. Even those that are in the system are not prioritized, because we just saw that NSFAS have defunded some certain degrees that they think is particularly bogus, or that I don't know what measure that they've used. Yeah. So youth is not a priority, and it's a concern, and we can't be happy with any form of reprioritization that does not center youth.
Bonga, let me thank you very much for joining us tonight. That was the chairperson of the WITS Rethinking Economics for Africa, Mosala, and the Secretary General of the WITS Black Management Forum, Bonga Makhanya.